every subject that you need to learn has a core idea. And once you've understood what that core idea is, then everything else that you learn adds to your expertise and makes sense because it fits into that overall big idea. Well, the big idea, the core idea in accelerated learning is that everyone has a personal learning style, a way of learning that suits them best. And once you've found the learning tools, strategies, if you like, that match that personal learning style, well, you'll be learning in ways that suit your particular brain. And because it's therefore more natural, it's more comfortable, and it's easier. And because it's easier, it's quicker. Hence the name accelerated learning. Well, this video will give you dozens of ideas to learn better and faster. Try them, pick the ones that suit you best, and you'll have a set of learning tools that's custom-made for your brain. But why would you want to become a faster learner? I think there are 5 reasons. First, knowledge is doubling every 2 or 3 years. There's more to read, there's more to know. What you know today, unfortunately, won't buy you success tomorrow. Secondly, the average person now leaving college can expect 5 careers in a lifetime. That's not jobs, that's careers. Thirdly, nobody today can guarantee their employment. But what you can do is you can guarantee your employability, which comes from constantly expanding your skills and simply learning faster than your competitors. Fourthly, we're in the era of mind power, not manpower. To earn more, you have to learn more. And fifthly, technology is the driving force today, and of course it's changing faster and faster. It's all summed up in one word: change. The constant upgrading of your skills, lifelong learning, is the minimum threshold to stay competitive today. And in such a fast-changing world, learning how to learn surely has to be the core skill, because what you learn can, in fact, will become out of date. How to learn, well, that's a skill for life. And that's incidentally why I really hope that you'll share the techniques on this video with your children. Let me spend a few moments talking about your brain, because that's, of course, what you learn with. 90% of what we now know about the human brain has been discovered in the last 20 years, and accelerated learning is based upon those important new discoveries. Accelerated learning, as you'll see, consciously starts with the big picture because that suits the faster, global, learning right side of the brain. But then it presents information logically to suit the more linear left side of the brain. Here's one of the most fascinating of the new discoveries. There's a middle part of the brain which is a key to your learning. This middle brain controls your emotions, your immune system, a lot of the long-term memory, and it acts rather like a filter. Now, information coming into your brain from your senses passes through this middle brain. But if you're under stress, well, that information may not get released properly to the top thinking brain. The final information you need on your brain is that the idea of a single fixed form of intelligence, which you can measure as an IQ, has, I'm pleased to say, been discredited. In its place, Dr. Howard Gardner, who's professor of education at Harvard University, has shown that we have at least seven different forms of intelligence, and maybe an 8th. Each of those intelligences represents a resource for learning. You have a linguistic intelligence, the ability to absorb and use the written and spoken word. A mathematical logical intelligence, the ability to handle numbers and sequences and logically presented data. There's a visual spatial intelligence. You use this in navigation, in drawing, sculpture, diagrams. There's a physical intelligence, the ability to use your body well. Interpersonal, the ability to communicate well, to read other people's moods and body language sensitively. There's an intrapersonal intelligence. That's an inner-directed intelligence, the ability to be reflective, to make plans, to draw conclusions. And finally, a musical intelligence, the ability to use rhythm and rhyme well. Now, the result of all our research on learning and the brain has led us to see that effective learning follows 6 stages. Let me go over them briefly. Stage 1, your state of mind. You need to be relaxed, motivated and focused. In other words, to mobilize that middle brain. Stage 2, whatever you're learning, it involves fresh information coming into your brain from the outside. So learning involves seeing and hearing and doing. And the more sharply your senses are focused on the subject, the better you will learn. Stage 3, you've now taken in the information. Well, now you need to actively explore the subject to make it your own. And that's when you'll use as many of your intelligences as possible. Stage 4, having understood the subject, you still need to commit it to memory in such a way that a simple trigger will cause the rest of the information to come flooding back. Stage 5, you now need to know, if you do know, to test yourself. In other words, do I really know this? And finally, stage 6, you need to reflect upon the whole process. In other words, to think back on which techniques really worked well for you and which ones might need to be modified. You see, you're now thinking not so much about what you've learned, but about how you learned it. These 6 stages provide an organized framework for fast and effective learning. But what do you actually do at each stage? Well, that's what my colleagues Malcolm Nicol and Jane Nicol are going to show you now with the aid of a studio audience of potential accelerated learners.
Welcome to Accelerated Learning. I'm Malcolm Nicol.
And I'm Jane Nicol.
Before you begin to learn anything, you need to get in the right state of mind for learning. That means that you have to have a belief in your own inherent ability to learn anything and to have fun, to find learning an enjoyable and fruitful experience. You really have to have that unerring belief. Let me give you a few examples of what I mean. You think of some of the most famous, most intelligent, most creative people in the world. Think of Walt Disney, for instance. Would you believe he was actually fired by a newspaper editor for lack of creative ideas? Einstein couldn't speak until he was 4, couldn't read until he was 7. And Beethoven, he was actually told by a music teacher that he was hopeless as a composer. And we all know what happened to those people.
What I'd like you to do now is think back to a time when you succeeded at something. It may be back in your childhood, it could have been in sport, it could have been in learning at school, something, a time when you felt so proud and people congratulated you, you were a success. Bring back those feelings. What were people saying to you? What were you feeling? What were you seeing? How did it make you stand tall and proud? Those are the feelings of success that you need to start learning with. You can learn, you can be successful because you've been successful before. This will really help to get you in the right frame of mind. And it helps you to feel better because the mind actually affects the body. So as you think these positive thoughts about your successful time, you'll actually find that you're standing or sitting a little bit straighter and that you're feeling much more ready for what we're going to do. Now, from the beliefs that you have, you actually can start by breathing very, very carefully. Your brain is only 4% of your body weight, but it actually requires 20% of the oxygen. So when you start learning, it's very important that you clear your mind and take some deep breaths to clear away all the stress and strain of the day. And again, if we'd like to sort of just join in here now, just 5 or 10 cycles of breathing in and feeling the oxygen getting into your lungs so that it can get to the brain to help you get ready to learn. And you go, breathe in gently, hold it for a couple of seconds and then out nice and gently. And again, in and you keep going. And as you're breathing out, you will feel the stress and the strain going. You will get your brain ready, nice and clear. And we should always employ this tactic before you start learning. It makes a break from what's been going on in the day, from all those things that buzz around in our heads. We're going to start learning now, so relaxed. This creates a very relaxed, focused frame of mind, which is the type of frame of mind you need to get on with learning and to do it in a very positive way.
Why are you learning anything? You have to know that before you start. you have to decide what we like to call WII-FM. You tune into radio station WII-FM. What's in it for me? What's the ultimate reward? What's the ultimate payback from the learning experience? Let me give you a few examples. Let's say, for instance, you were trying to learn a foreign language. Why do you want to learn French? Is it because you want to go on vacation to Paris and be able to go into a beautiful sidewalk cafe and order dinner and make sure that the steak comes back cooked the way you really want it? Or maybe it's a business expansion and you have a client that you can do business with in Mexico City. He doesn't speak English. Imagine how much to your advantage it will be if you can speak Spanish. So you need to have a clear vision of achieving that goal and what you're going to get out of it. Imagine yourself there in that sidewalk cafe, having ordered an exquisite dinner, having conversed fluently with the waiter. Picture yourself there. Imagine how good you will feel, how exalted you will feel. Just feel that elation. And the same if it happens to be a business negotiation. You're actually down there, sitting around the negotiating table in the boardroom. You've clinched the deal. You've shaken hands. You've impressed your client with your knowledge of his language. What a great courtesy. What a great business advantage. Now, on the way to getting there, you need to set yourself some goals. And you need to do things one step at a time. Because trying to learn a foreign language, for instance, seems like an immense task if you're sitting here today and you don't know a word of French or a word of Spanish. Try learning just 5 words a day. 5 words a day isn't very much, but over the course of an entire year, you could actually become very conversational in that particular language. Another important thing you can do for your motivation along the learning path is to actually reward yourself when you do achieve one of those goals. Pat yourself on the back. Give yourself a gold star. If you're going out to learn French and you achieve a certain level, take yourself out to a French dinner. Have a restaurant and practice your skills while you're there. Very, very important. Pat yourself on the back. We like to call it catch yourself doing it right. Another important thing is confidence, to build up your confidence levels. And I've talked already about learning a language, and it's a good example to continue with, because what you need to find at the beginning of any learning experience is what you already know. And you may not think you know any words of French or German or Spanish. You'll be amazed how much you do already know.
One good tip for learning is to summarize what you've learned as you progress. So let me recap what stage 1 was about. Essentially what Malcolm and Jane have said is that a little time spending preparing for learning makes a big difference later. Spending time to get focused and positive, motivated, psyched up if you like an athlete, is time very well spent. So, 1, think through exactly what this will do for you. 2, set a timetable and stick to it. 3, break the subject down into small chunks and celebrate each little victory. And 4, visualize really vividly what success will look like and feel like. You see, motivation isn't about grim determination. It's about making sure that you've programmed your subconscious mind to really want what you've set out to do. Okay, now let's look at stage 2, getting the facts to suit yourself.
So without any more ado, what we want to do right now is get you all speaking Japanese, counting for us very simply in 1 to 10 in Japanese. We'd like you to stand up just for a moment.
What we've done here is, you saw the Japanese characters before and you probably thought, how on earth are we going to count to 1 to 10 in Japanese? We've accelerated the process here. So we'll do them in pairs and build up as we go through. And if I'll take the lead, and if you'd like to follow, we start with 1 and 2, which are ichi, ni. So we scratch our knee. So it's ichi, ni. That's it. Come on, join in and say it, please. Ichi, ni. 3 and 4 are sun. We point to the sun. And she, we point to a lady. So we go from the top. Ichi, ni, sun, she. And again, ichi, ni, sun, she. 5 and 6 are go and rock. So for go, we just pretend to take a couple of paces forward, and for rock and roll, we can rock and roll. So we go from the top. Itchy, knee, sun, she, go, rock. Right, and again. Itchy, knee, sun, she, go, rock. 7 and 8. Now, 7 is shishi, so we do a double sneeze. So it's shishi, okay? Shishi. And 8 is hatshi, so we put on a hat and sneeze. So it's hatshi. Right, try those two. Shishi, hatshi. Okay, and again, she, hatchi. Remember the actions, it all helps to build the memory. So we start at the top with itchy, knee, sun, she, go, rock, she, hatchi. And again, itchy, knee, sun, she, go, rock, she, and hatchi. Great. And the last pair are 9 and 10, which is coo, like a dove, and ju, we put on the yarmulke, right? So it's coo and ju, okay? From the top. Itchy, knee, sun, she, go, rock, she, hatchi, coo, and ju. We will be coming back to this later on, and we'll see just how much you've remembered. Thank you very much. You sit down.
That was really excellent. Thank you very much. A very good participatory audience. It's got you all warmed up as well. But this is true multi-sensory learning. And when we first said to you, we're going to teach you how to count to 10 in Japanese, I could see expressions on your faces. You couldn't believe it. Perhaps now you can believe it. Jane?
One of the techniques that we use in accelerated learning for helping you to make sure that things are in your style is to actually get a big picture overview. When you're starting a subject, look at the whole thing, see where you're leading to so that you can see how the parts build up and fit in. The next technique that we like to use is to actually break that big picture down into small steps, because again, just like goals in life, if you've got small steps along the way, you can reward yourself as you achieve them, you can calculate how you're progressing, you know you're moving towards your final destination. Now, there are many, many ways of learning, of getting input. It can be an audio tape program, it can be videos, television programs, lectures, books. No matter what input you use, to make sure that you're listening or watching very carefully, you should always be trying to ask questions of the person who wrote the program, who wrote the book, who's presenting. Because if you're always listening to ask the questions, to try and trip them up if you like, then you're listening well and you're making sure that you're concentrating, looking for the things that you need clarification on. And we recommend that you use the A, E, I, O, U that's on the board there, which are the vowels in the alphabet, to remember the type of questions you need to be asking. They are assumptions. You know, what assumptions are being made here? What evidence is there for the answers? What illustrates this point? Or what illustrations can I think of in my own work? What opinions or conclusions can I draw from what's being said? And basically, what's unique about this? What haven't I heard before? What can I do with this? So always be forming questions, asking the author, the writer, the presenter in your mind, you know, get your answers. You'll be very much listening well if you do that.
As Jane mentioned, as adults, there are 3 key ways that we take in information: visual, auditory, and physical. And I'd just like to ask you to consider for a moment how you best remember various events that happen. Let's say, for instance, that you're watching TV, or you're at the movies, or even reading a book. Do you, A, best remember what you see? Do you remember the scenes? Do you remember what people look like? Or B, do you remember the dialogue? Do you remember what people have to say? Do you remember people's names? Do you remember the jokes? Or C, do you remember what happened? Do you remember how the characters felt? Do you remember how you felt watching them or reading about them? You are all unique individuals, and you all have preferences. And this is what multisensory learning is all about, is to help you recognize the ones that you have and to embrace the others as well for true multi-chance, multisensory learning. Jane?
We've seen a lot of techniques so far and mentioned a lot of techniques that actually refer to each of the senses. The visual people will certainly find techniques like highlighting. As you go through a textbook, don't be afraid to highlight, because we've all been brought up to respect books, but basically they need to work for you, and you should be involved in what you're learning. Go through, highlight the text as you find new information, underline it. Those sort of things will be very helpful for the visual people. You can also use mental imagery and visualization to put yourself in a situation where you're using your learning. That's a very visual technique. You can watch demonstrations. You maybe need to see somebody doing something before it really makes sense to you. And also the mapping technique that we'll be showing you in a little while, like the maps that we're using here, would very much be a visual technique where you can see what we're talking about. For people who are more auditory, they don't need necessarily to take so many notes, because that's their way of learning. They take the information in an auditory style. And things like audio tapes, even reading into an audio tape themselves to help revise, that would certainly help. They appreciate the sound of the voice. You can use tone and even use crazy accents to make things stand out more when you're taping your own revision. Reading out loud is definitely helpful for somebody who's auditory, and obviously lectures are ideal for them. For the physical learners, they really need hands-on. They need to actually be doing things to make sense to them. So again, actually taking part in a demonstration or taking part in role play would certainly be an advantage for them.
What we're going to do now is actually show you how to read through a textbook in a very powerful way, so that you can absorb information and comprehend information even while taking it in at a pretty fast rate. Jane?
We're using the imaginary example of a 250-page book. You know, a lot of us get these books and we know we need to find the information. But in this day and age, it's where do you find the time to actually wade through, learn it, and get anything useful out of it. So we're going to look at, say, a 250-page book that's divided into 10 chapters. Now, using techniques at the stage of learning, we first of all get a big picture overview. And to do that, we look at the chapter heads, we look at the title and the author, we look at the chapter heads, we look at the index, so that we've got a general idea of what the whole book is about. We spend about 5 or 10 minutes just doing that. We then preview the first chapter. We spend about 3 minutes really going through, reading any subheadings and looking to see what information is in there. And basically at this point, you stop after the first chapter and you say, have I found anything of use? Because my time's precious. You know, if I haven't found anything in an overview and a preview, then am I going to find anything in the other 9 chapters? So you actually make a conscious decision there of whether the book is useful to you, and it's going to add to your knowledge. You don't have time to waste on things that are only what you already know. So you spend about 3 minutes a chapter if you've decided that the rest of the book is going to be useful for you. You can then sketch out in note form what you already know about each of the chapters, about the subject. That, again, about 3 minutes a chapter, 30 minutes for the book. And then ask the questions that we mentioned before over on the other board, the A, E, I, O, and U, assumptions, evidence, what illustrates this, what opinions are being drawn, and what is unique about it. Those questions will show you what you need to know about the text. Again, 3 minutes a chapter, 30 minutes for a book. Now we come on to speed reading. And yes, it's quite easy for all of us to actually achieve a speed of 10 to 15 seconds a page. And I encourage you to look at speed reading, because basically the way we've all been taught to read is to vocalize in our heads as we read the words. Now that means we stop on each word and we focus. It means that the brain, which works at far faster than that, gets bored, so it back skips, it wastes time, it wanders. If you teach yourself how to speed read, and you can achieve quite easily at least 2,000 words a minute because your eyes work quite happily at that speed, scanning the pages, you will find the key words that you need to know about are there, and you will focus in on them. It actually stops the brain getting bored, so you're more effectively reading, and you can achieve this 15 to 20 seconds a page and really, get the information that you need without the wasting of time that the vocalization causes in the brain. 15 seconds a page, about 8 minutes for a chapter. That means you've spent about 80 minutes on the book. We then go on to step 6, which is the after view. Now, during your speed reading, there will have been sections that perhaps didn't quite gel as you went through. These are the more difficult ones, and we would recommend that you go back in this after view and actually read that paragraph out loud, because you're actually then hearing it as well as seeing it and saying it. We're adding more senses every time we do this. So difficult paragraphs, spend about 10 minutes a chapter doing this. We then make notes. You're actually turning what you've read, the information, you're converting it now into notes at 10 minutes a chapter, about 100 minutes. And then probably the most important thing when you're learning is a review cycle. What's the point of doing all this if you can't remember what you've actually read or learned? And for a review cycle, we would just recommend that you looked at these notes that you made here for 10 minutes the next day, for 10 minutes the next week, and for 10 minutes the next month. And that way you've revisited them and you've locked the information into your mind.
So here, in just 410 minutes, less than 7 hours, you've read an entire 250-page textbook. But you haven't just read it, you've reviewed it, you've re-reviewed it, you've made notes, but also you fully understood and fully comprehended it. That's the power of power reading. Now, in terms of taking notes, there's another very important technique that we call learning maps. And we've actually already introduced you to learning maps, because that's exactly what this is here. It's a unique way of making information much more memorable. And we do have in the studio audience today somebody who has effectively used a learning map in his work relationships. I'd like to ask Jerry Cohen to come up and share with us his experiences. Welcome, Jerry.
Hi.
Would you please tell us, first of all, what your occupation is, what you do?
Yes, I'm a global account manager for Hewlett-Packard Components Group.
Mm-hmm. And how have you embraced the whole idea of learning maps?
Well, I've used learning maps for different things. I found it very useful for presentations. Mm-hmm. For instance, I have in front of me a presentation that I did a period of time ago, and it was a region review. So I centralized the talk about the region review, mm-hmm. and I had different portions that came off, that radiated off it, and I talked about each thing in turn. And the incredibly powerful thing that I learned about this is that after reviewing it and going through it, I can actually create a picture of this in my mind, mm-hmm. and I can therefore go to a section and see it in my mind, what all the things I'm going to talk about, what all the key elements are, mm-hmm. and the order I'm going to talk about it in. Right.
And I see you've used different colors as well. So how important
right.
was that?
The different colors aren't really essential, but they do help to distinguish it a little bit better.
Mm-hmm. And how do you find this kind of learning, keeping notes, is different from the old-fashioned linear methods, I guess?
Yes. In the beginning, I really didn't see what, just by reading about it, I really didn't see what the difference was. Mm-hmm. When I actually started using it, I found that it made a tremendous difference. Mm-hmm. I found that I can visualize the sequence of events. When I made notes, I could then put another note right in the exact spot. If you did it in a linear fashion, there's no room for adding it. Everything is in a sequence of what you went through, but not necessarily in an organized way.
And this is a very important point, because for learning to become truly memorable, you actually have to implement it and put it into effect. And this is something that you've now shared with other people?
Yes, in fact, I've given these techniques to people in my group, and they've used them. Some of them are in the audience there.
Great.
And they've used them and different things as well.
Okay. Thank you very much, Jerry.
Okay.
We appreciate it. Okay. So there you see what learning maps are all about and how they can actually be applied into the workplace very, very effectively. It's a true way of learning, using all of our senses for learning.
So how do we actually build a learning map? Basically, we find out what the core idea is, and we put that in the center. So we build up from a core, and each subject will have a branch. And on a learning map, maybe the first branch is, what are we going to record? We're going to record ideas. So we just put a little branch for ideas. You don't record great long reams of words. You're actually recording ideas. And the ideas will be recorded in just maybe keywords. So that one word will trigger the memories and you'll remember everything else. Now, you might actually record in pictures if you're a good artist. If your brain thinks that way, you might start drawing your whatever it is you're talking about. I've got a nice little house there. Or it could be you're drawing symbols where you've got big arrows going from one thing to another, where it loops and joins up information, things that aren't even possible on linear maps without really getting completely lost. You might then have another section which says, well, what can we use them for? Jerry's used them for presentations. Anything that you have to write notes for. So it could be for meetings, to actually record ideas from meetings. Brainstorming is another wonderful way, because you can go back to add information later as it crops up, and yes, it's related to that, or it's related to something else. Colour is very important. The visual memory is very, very strong. And this is why learning maps work, because instead of having 6 pages of notes, you've actually got all your notes on one page, and you almost take a photograph of it with your brain. And if you're trying to learn from it, and you're redrawing a map, your brain will be looking for what's missing. So you might have, on the original one, had 3 legs, and you think, that part of the subject I've completely lost. That's where I need to do some more work, because your brain is in tune with this sort of learning. A brain cell is very much like this. You've got a center and you've got all the connections coming out from it. So we make it as memorable as possible, and we use a lot of colour. Colour can be used to relate different parts of the information so that you can track that the same ideas are in the same colour. It can be used, as I said, to actually relate things. So, you have these, the colour is important, and we want to colour the key words maybe. So we add the colour into the keywords. You also maybe use different sorts of lettering. I mean, on a rough map, you just go through quickly, but then part of the technique is to actually redraw your notes later so that you organise them more. And that's all part of the memory and learning process. But, you might have something, if you write in the word stress, you might go, and really make it look like what it's supposed to be. So that's stress, or, we had one on the earlier one which was relax, and it was a very laid-back lettering. They're just visual ways of making your notes come alive, and they can be so useful because you can picture what you've learned. And the old saying is, picture's worth 1,000 words. This is definitely a way that we would encourage you to try, because like Jerry said, once you've tried, you really do realise how useful they can be, and you end up using them in preference to any other method of taking notes.
So we each have a preferred individual learning style. We really have a combination of intelligences. What accelerated learning does is it helps you identify what you're good at, and it also identifies the things that maybe you want to work on, so you can embrace all of the different intelligences.
Learning must never be passive. You have to be doing something as you learn. And this chart, I think, really tells a story. On average, we only remember about 20% of what we read, 30% of what we hear, 40% of what we see, and about 50% of what we say. But the single most effective way to learn is to physically do something, to be actively involved. But that still only results in about 60% recall. However, if we can see it, if we can hear it, if we can say it, and if we can do it all together, then we can increase that recall to 90%. Multi-sensory learning really pays dividends. I remember I once asked a group from an insurance company to write down the individual processes involved in dealing with a claim. Each person held up one of the processes in front of him, and then they all positioned themselves in the correct sequence at the front of the room. It was a very powerful learning experience that they never forgot. And speaking of powerful learning experiences, what are you doing right now as an active learner? Are you making a learning map? Will you stop the video and think through what would work best for you? That's what we mean by active participation. Knowing about a subject and really understanding it are two different things. Well, if you've done a good job at stage 2, you'll certainly know about your subject. But will you really understand it? Converting data into understanding is the job of stage 3.
We're going to look now at the traits, if you like, of the 7 intelligences. And we all have a different profile of them. We all have all 7, but we just use them in a way that is unique to us. So when I pose some questions, by all means, you will be able to answer yes to more than one, because we don't just rely on one intelligence. And the first one we're looking at is the linguistic intelligence. Now, are there people here who enjoy verbal arguments or crosswords, things like that? Those are the linguistic talents, and they would certainly be using things like asking questions or rephrasing what they're learning in their own words. That would be a way of actually employing this linguistic talent. Now, for people who like figures and accounting and science, and maybe calculating the betting odds, that is a display of the mathematical intelligence, mathematical and logical. And the sort of techniques that we can use to help us use that would be to rate and categorize what we're learning, to put them into numbered lists so that we can use this affinity we have with our mathematical, logical intelligence. A lot of people enjoy actually things like dressmaking or building models. That is using their visual spatial intelligence. And again, as far as a learning tool, we can use this by using visualization, and actually the mind mapping that we looked at in the last stage would be very, very useful to bring out this visual spatial intelligence. And then there's a group of people who definitely need to get hands-on, the people who are good at sports, for whom physical activities are the way that they transfer their learning into being. And they're the sort of people who would definitely need to be involved in actually learning, in experiments, in demonstrations, really working through and getting their hands into what they're actually learning about.
Are there any people here today who are good at music? You play the piano, play the guitar, and many other of you are also good at music. You have a good sense of rhythm. You can recognize a tune. You're musically talented as well. And what you should do is you should have pleasant music playing in the background when you're learning. Or you should turn things that you've learned into jingles or rhymes to help you remember them more effectively. Are there people here today who are good at note-taking? And you like to keep notes of everything that you do. And you also like to sit down and think and reflect and analyze what you're doing. You would have an intrapersonal intelligence. So you should make sure that in any learning situation, you allow for quiet time so that you can afterwards sit down, work out what went well, what could have gone better, and so how you can apply it in the future. Are there people here who like working in teams? You like working with other people? Maybe you like helping other people or teaching other people. You would have an interpersonal intelligence. So you should make sure that the learning experiences for you is something that you do with other people. So you can share and compare notes with other people, and you will be much more effective in the learning process. So as we've mentioned before, the whole idea of having a fixed IQ, an intelligent quotient, has been thrown away. because there really are now at least 7, maybe even 8 different kinds of intelligence, and we all have a combination of each of those intelligences. So in the old days, what we like to call old-fashioned learning really was principled on the 2 intelligences, linguistic and logical mathematical. It really just gave you a one-hit, a single chance of learning. But today, we're talking about a multiple chance of learning by exposing to you the benefits of learning using all of these different intelligences.
There's a lot of talk these days that every company must become a learning organization. Now, a learning organization is characterized by groups of people deciding for themselves what they need to learn in order for the company to succeed and for them to develop their personal skills. Now, let me give you a simple but dynamic idea that I've introduced into many of the companies that I work with. Small groups of people, say 5, form what I call learning action circles. Now, each month they decide what they'll learn. Then they each take a book or a tape course on the subject. At the end of the month, they each teach what they've learned to the others and how the ideas can be adapted to the company's own particular circumstances. The result? Then the very act of teaching it to the others really does ensure that you understand the subject well, and secondly, you get to master 5 times as much material in the same time. Now, that really is accelerated learning. I'm sure you could use the same idea in your own organization. Let's briefly look at how a language learner used an accelerated learning course, language course, through a whole range of his intelligences.
I use post-it notes. The good thing about them is that you can stick them on and off different objects. I tend to stick them on objects that I don't know the words for. I had one on the drawer for le tiroir, and I could never remember the word for central heating, so I actually stuck one on the radiator with le chauffage central on it. And again, it was a very simple way of remembering keywords, key phrases. The physical, it seemed somehow as if the physical act of sticking it on and then looking at it and reading it aloud all together made me learn it very, very quickly indeed. What I did was I got myself 4 big white blank pieces of paper and some colouring pens, and each time I came across one of these words in the course, I drew a picture of it, because that's a good way to remember it, and I wrote the French word underneath. And as time progressed, I filled the posters more and more, until now all 4 of them are complete. It was interesting, when I first started off this course, that in the instructions, it advises you to write in the book, to use lots of different colours, to highlight verbs, and to interact with the book as far as you can. And I must admit, initially, I was a bit concerned about that, because I guess traditionally you tend to think of a book as something that you passively read and you don't write in. But I mean, I'm just amazed at the impact that actually physically writing in the book, highlighting it, making the notes in the book. I don't need lots of other written notes. This is my notes. And it almost makes the book like another person. It makes the book talk back to you.
Fumeur ou non-fumeur? Non-fumeur. Bon.
I'll just launch into an imaginary conversation with myself. One step beyond doing it with the book, I'll just imagine I'm in a situation and I'll act out the part of 2 people.
Incidentally, which of the exploration takes are you using right now? Let's now turn to stage 4. You've really learned the subject. But how do you make sure that you remember it all long term? Let's look at some excellent memory strategies.
We're now looking at stage 4 of the learning process, which is memorizing the key facts. And basically, stage 2, which was getting the facts in the right way to suit you, and then stage 3, spending time exploring it with these 7 or 8 intelligences so that you truly understand what you're learning, is all a waste of time, quite honestly, unless at stage 4 you can actually remember and recall when you actually need to use that information.
Now, we all have excellent memories, believe it or not. Let me just test you for a moment. Imagine that you're in the kitchen of your home. Can you see it? Can you see everything that's there? You know where the oven is situated. You know where the refrigerator is situated, you could probably see the color of it, whether it's black or green or that ugly yellow that they have sometimes. You can see where the coffee machine is. Maybe for you, thinking what your kitchen is like conjures up a smell of the coffee that's brewing in the morning. But you can each picture in your own mind's eye exactly the layout of your own kitchens. You've seen it, you've remembered it. The important thing that we need to do is take in the information and transfer short-term memory into long-term memory so that then you can trigger it and you have it, something you can use forevermore. Jane?
One of the fundamental things in memory is, it may sound crazy, but the first thing you have to do is actually decide you're going to remember. Make a conscious effort and say, yes, I'm going to remember this. That is the first thing to key up the brain ready for, I'm going to make a memory here. And I like to think of making a memory, if you like, as almost forging a path through the forest. The first time you go through, you part the trees, you struggle through, you get to the other side, and you look back, and nobody would ever know that you've gone through there. There's not a path defined through that forest. But if you go back that same route every so often, gradually you wear away the undergrowth. You make that connection from one side of the forest to the other much stronger. And that is exactly what happens with a memory. And to make use of this, we like to use what's called a review cycle. And that is basically you learn your materials, you review them within an hour so that you've got a very early review of materials. And if you're using learning maps, this is the ideal way to do it because you flash your map for a couple of minutes. You then review again within 24 hours of learning. You review within a week. You review after a month and after 6 months. And the staggering thing that happens to your recollections is that without a review cycle, in 24 hours, you will only remember 30% of what you've done today. With a review cycle, after 6 months, you can be as high as 80% recall. That is a tremendous difference. So it's well worth getting into this habit of a short review on a regular basis to keep you up to speed on what you're learning. And as I said, reviewing with a map is definitely a very easy way of doing it. Now, the other thing that makes your memories much more memorable, much more easy to recall, is using the multisensory learning that we talked about. If you can make your memories both visual and physical memories and also auditory so that when you're recalling something you have all these different inputs there, that will make them stronger. If you link them to things like humour, humour is very, very memorable. So make your memories funny, make them interact with each other, put movement into your memories. That will all help recall.
One of my favourite ways of learning anything is to come up with an acronym. Here you see an acronym for the word negotiate, and we're going to be teaching you a way of learning the key points of negotiating skills. We use acronyms all the time. When you're at school, you probably learned the Great Lakes, Holmes, Huron, Ontario, Michigan, Erie, Superior. The government just loves acronyms. You know, you've got NASA, and you've got the FBI, and the CIA, and HUD, and you can remember the names of those agencies. So for those of you involved in sales or negotiating, or in fact for anybody, because we're all negotiating every day of our lives in different situations, we came up with the word negotiate and we turned it into an acronym so that every individual letter stands for a key word, a key technique when negotiating. The N stands for navigate, because one of the first things you should do is take charge of the negotiation. You're navigating your way through it, you're steering it. Then E is for eyes and ears. You need to keep your eyes open for any giveaway body language signals, and you need to keep your ears alert for the hidden meanings in conversation, the things that people say and also the things that they don't say. The G in negotiate is for grimace, and this is one of the most basic tactics of all, which is that whenever anybody makes you an offer, the first thing you do is flinch. You pull a face. You don't like it. You grimace. The O is outrageous. Similar to the one before, anytime anybody makes you an offer, it's outrageous. You couldn't possibly accept that. But you yourself know that you, in turn, will also be making outrageous demands. The T is for trade-off. And this is something that you should do immediately, always, when somebody asks you for a concession, you ask for something in return. It's a trade-off. I is for impersonate. In any negotiating situation, you're going to be pretending that you're either a reluctant buyer, maybe, or you're a reluctant seller, or you're raising issues that aren't really of any great concern to you. It's a decoy, it's a red herring, but you're raising those to get them settled before you move on to the main issue. Or you might be pretending to be dumb when in fact you know that you're really smart. So that's I for impersonate. The A is for agree. And most salespeople know this, that you should always agree up front with the customer. Yes, I understand what you're saying. I see your point entirely. But, or you can use the good old feel, felt, found technique. Know how you feel, other people have felt the same way, but what they found eventually was. The T in negotiate is for teasing. This is really nibbling and getting extra concessions. You've already agreed that you're getting a $50,000 a year salary. You've agreed the health benefits package. You've agreed how many weeks vacation you're going to have. You've shaken hands, and just as you're turning away to walk out the door, you turn back and you say, oh yes, and that does include membership in the country club, doesn't it? So you're just teasing for an extra concession, probably at the last minute. And the last one in negotiate is E, for easy acceptance. Because after you've got everything that you want in the negotiation, you want it to be a win-win. You want the other person to be happy. So you want to make it easy for them to accept the deal. So you can make them a promise such as, well, the next time I'm in town, I will come to you first, and I make sure that you get our most favored rates. So the way I learned the key skills for negotiating was to actually put them into this kind of acronym. And these are the key points that my good friend Roger Dawson came up with in his negotiating programs.
Malcolm is very gifted with the linguistic talent, and obviously for him to create an acronym is something that's natural and easy. For people who maybe aren't quite so good with words, what they would probably do is use their mathematical talent and just literally number the points as they came across them, and then they would be able to say, there are 9 key areas that I have to remember. And obviously as you work through them, if you can only get to 8, you know you're missing one. And the same sort of principle, but using more of a mathematical approach than the linguistic one. Another way of actually committing what you're learning to memory and helping you revise things is to create flashcards. And again, we've used the negotiate acronym, and basically if you're stuck in a traffic jam and you've got them with you, you can pick them up and what does the N stand for? And on the back we've got the key points. Steer the negotiation in the right direction, lay down the initial criteria, and you can go through them so that you can gradually learn and test yourself on the different stages. So there's another technique that's very, very useful. Basically, to round up this section on memory, one of the key things is to understand that when we're asleep and our eyes are offline, the brain carries on working and sifts through the information that we've been taking in all day long. So actually sleeping on it is a very important memory technique. And we've all experienced, you go to bed and you're trying to remember something and you really can't amongst everything else that's gone on. And next morning you wake up and you think, there it is, it just popped out. The brain has been working while you're asleep, filing all the bits of information in the right categories. And, with some of these memory techniques that we've introduced here and reminded you of, you certainly will find that overnight your memories will get put in the right places so that you can recall them when you need them.
Now let me add one excellent memory technique to the ones you've already seen, and it rejoices in the title of memory flashing. Essentially what you do is that you take your notes, your memory map if that's what you've done, you study it, and then you put it on one side, and you recreate that memory map or those notes from memory. Now of course, when you then compare the original with the new set of notes, there's probably going to initially to be a difference. But if you do that process second time, third time even, until the new notes and the original are identical, then you really will have learnt that information cold. Now I've taught that memory flashing technique to students, and many of them have told me that they get into an examination room and they absolutely can bring the whole information up visually into their memory. It's like copying it down from a blackboard. It's a very good learning strategy. I think of all the memory strategies that you've seen, the two with the biggest payoffs are memory flashing that I just showed you and the review cycle. And that review cycle is absolutely critical because research shows that the typical person normally forgets 70% of what they've learnt within 24 hours, and yet by using that quick review cycle you can achieve an 80% recall after 6 months. Now that's a huge difference. Okay, you now understand the subject thoroughly and you remember it. What else? Test yourself. And we call this stage show you know.
We really need to practice what we're learning and make use of it in many different ways. We can do that by visualizing what we're learning, by putting ourselves in the picture and mentally rehearsing how we're going to use it in a situation. We could actually role play it with somebody else so that you each take a role and act out an imaginary situation. Make sure that you can use what you've learned to show you know. Tell your family about it and show you know.
It's very important to use it, to implement whatever you've learned in a classroom or a training room, and do it within 24 hours. Because by putting something into a real-life experience, you will be embedding it into your brain and you'll be able to use it forevermore. You know, it's one thing to learn something in a classroom situation. It's an entirely different matter to take it and implement it in a workplace situation. So if you've been on that computer course, make sure that when you get to work, you find a use for it. You build a database. You've got the computer programming all worked out. You've got to use it if you want to remember it. Check with others. What we're saying here is that learning shouldn't be a lonely experience. There are other people that are learning with you in most situations. Or if not, find somebody who will. And by interacting with that other person, you can literally double your learning power. Make sure that you keep reminding yourself of what you've learned. Make flashcards, make posters, make learning maps, have little post-it stickers, put them on the notice board, stick them on the refrigerator, put them in places where in the course of a day you will almost accidentally come upon those reminders of what you've learned, and those constant reminders will again help embed that information into your long-term memory. Work with your family. Your family hopefully is supportive of whatever it is that you're learning. So sit down with them, rehearse with them, get them to let you talk to them about what you've learned. Because when you have to tell somebody about what you've learned, you really have to marshal your thoughts. You really have to make sure that you understand it so you can communicate it to somebody else. Find yourself a mentor. Find yourself somebody who's more experienced than you are, who will be your guardian angel, if you like, somebody that you can go to who will give you support and encouragement and will have that extra piece of knowledge that you don't yet have. And finally, make a learning log. Keep a daily record of everything that you've learned, whether it's a new foreign word, whether it's a new English word, whether it's a computer code, whatever it might be. Just keep drawing up a list of everything that you've learned. Imagine how motivating it is when you've got your learning log of all your newfound, your newly acquired wisdom. Very motivating.
We also have a technique that we call learning action circles. And really what we do is we like people who are learning to link up with other people, a group of study buddies we call them. Because when you join with other people and you share the learning, you learn from each other, you help the other person learn, you also introduce them to maybe a different way of learning because your techniques might not be their techniques. So everybody builds a common understanding then of different learning styles, and you can benefit from other people's learning styles.
Stage 6, and an important part of the learning process, is reviewing what you've learned. Taking time out to sit back and reflect on what you've learned so that you can have that information to use forever.
This really is a self-analysis section. You use that intrapersonal intelligence to actually reflect and go through the process that you use, not the subject. So it's not so much the what we've learned, it's How did I learn? What techniques worked for me? What tools can I use again? Or what tools really didn't work? Let's, find some others. So you review and you find out what you can use that's going to benefit you. And there are two important questions that we ask at this stage. And the first is, what went well?
And the second is, what could have gone better? So to help us with this whole review process, what we've done is to put together what we call a personal progress plan. And this is something where you can sit down and ask yourself these key questions and make notes at your leisure. The most important things I learned are, you should prioritize the important things from any learning session. Secondly, as a result, I will do this or use these following ideas. So you haven't just learned something, you know how it's going to impact upon you in the real life situation.
The third one is, I can expect this initial difficulty, but I will overcome it by this action. This is actually addressing the fact that you realise that, it's not going to be plain sailing all the way through, and that there may be little stops and stumbles along the way, but you're prepared for them. The next one is, I will check on my progress. I will know when I've succeeded. So we go back to earlier today when we spoke about rewarding yourself. You don't have people around you like teachers and parents who reward children when they learn and achieve. You have got to install some sort of reward program and pat yourself on the back when you achieve it.
And that's actually the next key point, to identify how you are going to reward your success. Is it a pat on the back? Are you going to give yourself a gold star? Are you going to take yourself out for dinner to that French restaurant? You catch yourself doing it right. You also need to identify, I need to learn more about this. Yes, you've learned a lot and you've making major leaps forward, but there's bound to be more information on any subject. That's your next learning point. And lastly, I will ask this person or these people to help. You find that mentor who can give you that helping hand, that person who can be your support and encouragement. Okay?
There are three keys to success, not just in learning, but success in life. The first is to start with the end in mind. Have a clear, strong vision of what you want to achieve, of where you want to be, because if you keep your eyes focused on that, you will find the route through it. The second one is to actually take responsibility for yourself. You cannot choose what happens to you, but you really can choose the way you react to it. So make sure that your reactions build for you the success that you want. And the third one is to learn from mistakes. We've said that. Don't ever be afraid of making mistakes, because the only person who doesn't make mistakes is the person who literally never does anything.
But it is important for us to all to acknowledge that we have something in common with the wealthiest and the most successful people in the world. 60 seconds in a minute, 60 minutes in an hour, 24 hours in a day, 7 days in a week. It's what we do with that time that's so important, how we maximize that time. And accelerated learning principles will help you make the most of that time. We tell you things like you need to prioritize and know what's important rather than what's urgent. That may sound like a silly thing to say, but there are times when you could be working on a very important business project. The telephone is ringing, so it seems urgent. You answer the telephone, and who's there but somebody you don't want to talk to? Somebody trying to sell you something, somebody trying to collect a bill, or whatever. They're people you don't want to talk to. A waste of time. You need to prioritize and know how you're going to spend your time valuably. Two other things I like to use called downtime and double time. Downtime really are those moments in the day that, again, we all have. The 15 minutes when we're waiting to catch a bus, the 15 minutes we're waiting to catch a train, or we're in the doctor's office or the dentist's office, and we're sitting there and we're idly flipping through magazines, or we're daydreaming. We could be spending that time instead very profitably. We've talked already, given you some examples about a foreign language. Imagine if you were carrying around with you flashcards with French words or Spanish words written on them. You can refer to them in that downtime. You would learn them, and you'd become quite effective in a foreign language over the course of a year, just spending 15 minutes of downtime a day. What I mean by double time is to really do two things at the same time. I'll give you a personal example. I started running about 3K 3 times a week. I found it quite boring, just plodding along there all by myself, until I got a Walkman. I invested in a Walkman. I invested in audio tapes from people such as Brian Tracy, Dennis Waitley, Roger Dawson. And so while I'm out there running, I'm not just being entertained, I'm gathering information. I'm improving my mind at the same time as I'm improving my body. Very important for us to make the most use of our time. And continuing on that theme, we'd really like to encourage you to push your personal comfort zone. Really try something new. You'll have discovered today your personal learning preferences, and you may be the kind of person who likes to sit down and quietly think through a problem and not be bothered by other people. But you might be amazed at the benefits you will accrue from sitting down with a group and trying to have an interpersonal learning experience. Some people don't like the thought of goal setting or visualizing success. I would encourage those people, the ones that are most reluctant to try something, to give it a try and to push your personal comfort level. We are living in a world of incredible accelerated change. The amount of information that we're asked to absorb on a daily basis is absolutely phenomenal, even compared to just a few years ago. And that's where accelerated learning is so important. Accelerated learning can help you learn anything easier, faster, better, more efficiently than ever before, if you will put it to use. We've given you some techniques today, we've given you some tactics, we've really shared some of the initial concepts of accelerated learning. But it's not going to do anybody any good at all unless you're willing to put it into practice. And we would encourage you to go away today and do that. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Okay, you've been through a really comprehensive learning experience now. You got into a relaxed, motivated, focused state of mind. You've actually turned the information into visual or auditory or a physical form, or indeed, ideally, a combination of all 3 forms. You've explored the subject thoroughly through a combination of your intelligences. You've memorized some key words to trigger your recall at any time in the future. And you've tested yourself. What more could you possibly do? Well, just one more thing. Take just a moment to think through not what you learned, but how you learned it. This brief last stage of review enables you to become a better and better learner and in total control of the process of your own learning and indeed development. If I had to pick out some of the absolutely key steps, I think I'd probably say, 1, focus really hard on what learning this subject is going to do for you. Power read the material to get the core idea quickly. Then create a memory map of what you know so far. And then keep adding to that memory map as you progress. Stop and summarize the key points in your own words. Then teach what you've learned to somebody else. Memory flash the learning maps until you know it absolutely cold. And finally, use a review cycle so that you really lock it all down in your memory. However, these are just my ideas because they suit my learning style. The most important question is, what will you do to accelerate your learning?